Okay, so today we will be talking about The Unicorn Project, a book by Gene Kim that is about really practicing something called DevOps, and that's about changing the systems and also a culture in a business so that they can be more efficient. These are things like making sure there's a good foundation and there's simplicity within each moving part, and then also making sure there's a flow to the system and a known goal. And there's just so much that goes into this, but we're going to get into it, starting with our character and the woman who's introduced, and her name is Maxine. So let's start. So, in the first chapter, Maxine is working and she has a great job, and out of nowhere, she is demoted and blamed for some payroll problems in her department, and she's reassigned to a project called the Phoenix Project, which is essentially what the book is written about. And she gets assigned to this new team and this new project that everyone kind of knows is the project that no one wants to work on. And so this sets the tone to a system that is just not running efficiently, a business that's not run efficiently, um, or the leaders think so, but it's obviously not bearing fruit. And so this chapter starts us up with sort of a failing part of a business, and Maxine is just kind of distraught about having to move to this new sector of the business. And as she gets there, she realizes that what she's heard is true, that it's not the place she wants to be. So we're going to start here and move through this book and some of the lessons it teaches as a roadmap. So in chapter 2, it's a lot about the dysfunction of the system, and the Phoenix Project just really has so many problems. There are dependencies. One thing is dependent on another, which makes things less efficient within the system and within the company in general. There are security problems, and this slows everything down and also creates red flags. And there are also outdated documents that just make everything slower and clutter everything. And all of this clutter really just also clutters the mind. So Maxine is really frustrated, and she is the type of person who wants to bring about change, but this chapter is really just um shows her frustration and the dysfunction of the system. And then in chapter 3, um she's just having a tough time doing her work because of the management and the upper level management having to approve things and being strict and just making it difficult for her to work. And she is obviously not the only one because this is how the system is set up. So in chapter 4, it's kind of exciting because Maxine um, kind of gets to know the rebels, or the group of people that are just fed up with the system as well. So she connects with them in secret. And really, what I would say about this chapter is that um, she finds out that she's not the only one. You know, they're all getting burnt out because the system is not foundationally good, although it has a lot of opportunity, and they all have a desire to change, and they see this opportunity. I don't think they can see how able they are to change it yet, but they do see the opportunity, which is why they are connecting. So that gets us to the next part, which is chapters 5, 6, 7, and 8, where the rebellion wants to really make their work more simple. And in turn, this is going to empower the team because with more simple work comes less clutter, as the other chapters were talking about, and just more efficiency. And so this will just bring more life to the unit. And from the start, when Maxine walked in, it was just dark and not a fun workplace. And so they just want to bring more life to the unit altogether and just make it a brighter place to work so that there is more efficiency and more creativity. And so chapter 6 goes into just all the waste of time. It's taking forever to create projects, put them to use, and then on top of this, in chapter 7, goes into some of the communication as well, which some of the other chapters already talk about, how the managers just have really unreasonable expectations, and they don't even realize this because the communication's so poor and the resources just aren't there and the foundation just isn't set up to produce what the managers want to be produced. And the employees really and the team really don't even have the ability to produce that because the managers don't fully understand the extent of the problem. And so we see this hardship and change, and Maxine trying to make good changes, but progress being really slow because other parts of the system are breaking. When you try to change one thing, it sets off a chain reaction of other things that need to be fixed. But that rebellion that I spoke about earlier is still a positive point, and she's still able to connect with them. And so they begin to like really make a plan together to progress and to work on the system and the workplace environment. And so things finally start to move along a little bit. I would say chapter 10 is kind of where we get to really see some change. The team gets to make some progress, and the system isn't so dysfunctional anymore. Well, it's still very dysfunctional actually, but it's starting to finally change a little bit. And the rebels are even growing, and Maxine officially joins them, and they continue to create some change. And really, over all this time, they're finally building some trust because at first it was hard for Maxine to completely trust them, but now that they're working together and they've known each other for a little bit longer, there's some trust growing. And um even the management is recognizing this, and so there's even some resistance to oppose the plans of change because change is never fun and people don't like change. They like to be comfortable. And this is what the company and this sector is struggling with. And so this brings on a new like basically um things are going really slow, and so the team is preparing to release a new product, but basically like dependencies like bottlenecks or the things in the systems that are slowing things down, when you solve one thing there is always a new one. And so dependencies are making things slow, and even though Maxine is working on these and the team are working on these, it's still difficult, and she's identifying constraints so that the delivery can be quicker. This just involves a lot of testing, and it's really frustrating that she always has to be approved through access, and it just slows things down. So there's this time restraint, and the rebellion really wants to work on building a better foundation. Um, there's some psychological fears, and so the team really isn't too creative, and so they also need to fight this so that management allows them not to have such a pressure on them that they can't communicate, but instead to promote more of an open space of thought and shared ideas so that there can be more creativity and not as much restraint on the team. So the executives start to see what the rebellion's up to, and there's both positives and negatives that they see. So finally, the team starts to deliver quicker, and the holidays are approaching, and I feel like this is a good chapter because there's just, you finally start to see some positivity. And then Maxine helps pitch new project ideas, and they begin to get some new resources or human resources, just new teams start to get involved as they're seeing this positivity. And finally, um, more teams start to emulate what they're doing and just build upon this better foundation. And when you have a good foundation, everything just flows more smoothly. So there's some results. um, Maxine really points out at the end here the importance of serving the customer first, which reminds me in the past of how important sales is for a business, because if you can't sell anything, then there's no reason to have the business. And so she really puts a target on serving the customer and how that is going to bring results and how customer focus is so important. And so the company starts to see results, and they start to see measurable results like quicker deployments, less outages, and just people are more joyful on the teams. So all in all, this is just like a run through of the chapters of the Unicorn Project. But now we're getting to another interesting part of the book, which is some of the lessons that I learned from each chapter that I like to go through just to summarize them in my head and remember them. And so chapter 1, I really learned that systems don't function, they still have opportunity, but productivity is being hurt. And there were so many skilled professionals when Maxine first walked into that business, and all their talent was really being wasted. So, like, there is opportunity, but productivity can really be being hurt in a system without a good foundation. And then in the next chapter, automation really sticks out as creating efficiency. And so without automation, everything's slower. And clear documentation is important, but over documenting things just makes everything slower and less automated. And then teams require freedom and not too many rules or authority, which can hurt team synergy and just make it so that people aren't as creative. And I really want to go back to Kobe's book that we read before because I really enjoyed it. And there are some quotes that really just mesh with both books. And he said, synergy is better than my way or your way, it's our way. And so I really think this goes back to how teams require freedom and not too much authority and thinking one way, but instead they have to think together, and that makes the team more powerful. So this gets us to chapter 4 and how big changes start small. And Maxine was really one of the small changes to the system, and she was making many small changes, and they brought on more problems, but essentially she worked through them, and the rebellion was as well. And so, she didn't see results at first, but making all these small little changes leads to big results. And so that brings us to chapter 5, where change starts with discontentment. And also, when people share a discontentment or share something bad that's happening, like the rebellion, then it's going to bring upon change. So they had the same values and they saw the same problems. They were struggling with the same things, and therefore it was easier to make a change. And then in chapter 6, we learn that feedback loops are useful to boost productivity and encourage creativity. So that is basically getting feedback from each cycle of planning and each phase of kind of production. And so you can learn from each cycle and move on and do better the next time. Kobe also says, which relates to this chapter, to change ourselves effectively, we first had to change our perceptions. So in order to change, you have to see things differently. So in chapter 7, we learn that you should know your business well in order to create shared goals for everyone to stand behind. So this kind of gets into the management and the poor communication going on. And this is okay because this difficulty really takes the team to a new level and how they really have to change their perception and have a shared perception and a shared goal. So also bad design and testing causes a rushed environment. That really made change difficult because there was so much pressure on the team. And progress is slow. So even if you do put pressure for progress, it might just be short term. So it's important just to keep consistent, small determination instead of trying to do anything huge, and just like they're doing, building a good foundation of consistency and testing so that it's not rushed, but it's progress that you can keep building upon. And progress obviously starts with imperfection and it starts with action. So I actually wanted to talk about this because it goes against what Kobe said. So one critique I have in the book is that Kobe said make time for planning and wars are one and the general's 10. But here we see in chapter 9 that progress starts with imperfection and action. There's a time to be done planning, and there is a time to take action instead of planning. And so that's one critique I had. But anyways, something to go on the other side is when you sow a thought, you reap an action. So an action, you reap a habit, you reap character, and that's gonna show your destiny. And so with these thoughts that the Rebel Alliance and Maxine had, um, they were followed by action. And even though this action was habitual and took a lot of consistency, um, the consistency paid off because in the end, they kind of sowed a new character for their company and a new perspective. And this changed their destiny and changed the Phoenix Project in general. And so it made life better for everyone. And also, other teams were starting to see this, and so there's even more progress to be made in the future. Okay, so some more lessons from the following chapters are that positive change creates catalyst, and this basically means that, once there's positive change, it's just going to be multiplied and multiplied. And this comes from consistently doing the right thing when things are really tough. And as we talked about before, this difficulty united the teams and built trust over time. And then basically they could expect that there was always going to be something new to tackle, but that they could do it and that there were positive effects coming out of it. And for that to happen, though, in chapter 12, we learned that the leadership really has to buy in, and there was some resistance from the management. So it makes it so much easier. We see it in the future when they actually buy in. So a pessimist sees a difficulty in every opportunity, but an optimist sees the opportunity in every difficulty. I really liked this quote. This is just a random quote because I think it kind of went with these chapters and seeing that if they wouldn't have gone through difficulty, they wouldn't have had so much opportunity. So, for even though going into this project, Maxine saw all the difficulty and was pessimistic, she began to learn to see opportunity in the difficulty. So with frequent automated availability of the consumers, to like provide the systems to them, success came quicker. But all the approval and requirements and security slowed down the process in chapter 13. And then also improving the foundation makes a huge impact on everything. So I think of it as like a home. Like if you have a good foundation, then the house is going to be so much easier to build. And I think of like a snow igloo and how if you don't start the first blocks out really solid and big and icy and strong, because I'm from Iowa, the igloo just is not going to be made right and the whole thing is going to fall. And so you really have to start out with a solid foundation. And this has to do with business because the whole system is going to flow from the foundation. So, like I said, these foundational security issues and all the approvals that needed to be made was just slowing the whole system down. And so improving that foundation had an impact on everything else. But also the psychology of the team was really important because they had to be more confident to share their ideas, which we talked about in the chapter. What we talked about in the chapters. And lastly, leadership can help change, but it can also create fear. And so too much power is not always good. Also, as we talked about earlier in other chapters, when you see small change, it proves something's possible and creates an emotion that makes big change more kind of more visible. And so it really creates that catalyst that we talked about. In chapter 18, we kind of learned about how important it is to test. And testing is essentially just, doing the difficult thing and trying things out and to make sure that it works. So, for larger scale changes to happen, everyone has to be on board. This just goes back to management and team goals and just good communication. Obviously, I talked about how Maxine thought it was so important for customers to come first. And then lastly, the 5 ideals, which we're going to talk about, bring benefit to the whole company, not just in IT, but like the 5 ideals are really great for everything. And these are keeping work small and simple and independent. Basically, this is focusing on locality and simplicity, and basically so that management doesn't take over too largely, but also to keep all the tasks more simple and independent, and to be able to create feedback loops so that you can look over the work that you're doing and change and be consistent and just keep improving. And then we have removing bottlenecks so everyone can do meaningful work instead of just going through something and just continuing to do it wrong and continuing to go through it even though it's not working. Instead, focusing on the flow and the joy and removing these bottlenecks and taking the time to do that. Always make today's work easier than yesterday's. So, like we talked about, you should always improve, 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 and then create a culture so that everyone can fail and learn, and so that the team isn't afraid to make mistakes and don't have so much pressure on them that they can't make mistakes and that they have to deliver a certain amount. There is like a healthy amount of pressure, but there's also an unhealthy amount that really, how do I say it? It's like when you can't breathe, it like really restricts a team from creativity. And then lastly, center everything on delivering value to the customers, customer, and sales. Some different applications are that innovation is constant, especially in the technological age. I'm gonna go through these quicker because I didn't expect to talk so much about the book. But all in all, I just learned that in a business, you're never really going to get to a point where you're not needing to change. And I didn't really understand that before reading some of this book, that, change is ongoing. You're never going to get to a point where you're like done changing. You're like, I have it where I want it. Like, you just have to be ready for constant change. And I think that's something that'll help me in the future with my businesses, to understand that, especially in the age of technology when everything's consistently being built up. Um, Also, you should challenge bureaucracy so that you can make more like creative choices and be more productive. I feel like I've kind of known this in the past. You know, there's Uncle Sam's, like there's governmental restrictions that slow down business, but also I guess I didn't really see this in a business. So it's kind of important for me as an aspiring business owner to realize that I can't take too much power, and that's hard to do, but I think there's plenty of Bible verses about humility, so this is definitely something I want to apply and focus on in the future. And then we have obviously the model of culture and leadership and having shared values, um, so that the final product reflects those values. And especially for software companies, this is really valuable so that the foundation of the model is created right so everything flows smoother. And lastly, and probably most importantly, servant leadership is so important because I know I'm gonna be a manager of businesses someday. So I think it was really good for me to see that leaders who were actually servants, and supported their teams and removed obstacles instead of just controlling their teams, um, that's what made the biggest difference. And having this focus on the customer as well, but also the team is the one who serves and produces for the customer, so the team really has to be taken care of. And I didn't realize until now how important it is that the leadership is really there to remove obstacles and to provide support instead of just being controlling. And so the book taught me that this servant mindset is so powerful. Okay, so that was the book The Unicorn Project by Gene Kim and just a little overview of it.